Dun, 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 dun. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, this is the first Monday of the month, which means it is McDougall Monday, where we are graced with the presence of both Dr. John and Mary McDougall. Dr. McDougall will be giving a brand new lecture on diabetes. But before I introduce Dr. McDougall, I also want to introduce some special guests. If you watch the show regularly, you know the last couple of times Dr. McDougall came on, we had people come on and give a testimonial to the work of Dr. McDougall, how his diet had changed their life and made them well. These are people that I didn't know that actually contacted me and said, can I please tell Dr. McDougall my story? And we're like, sure. Well, last time Dr. McDougall was on, he said, why don't you get Larry and Ann Weed on? They're almost 90 and they're doing great on the diet. So please welcome Larry and Ann Weed. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Our pleasure.
With the two of you.
Yeah.
Known you a long time and Dr. McDougall.
Yeah. So you've known Dr. McDougall for years. I mean, Larry, I can't believe you're going to be 90. You look amazing. And I know you guys, you have no cognitive decline. As far as I know, you're not on any medication or have any diseases. Tell us your story of how you found Dr. McDougall's work and how long you've been McDouggalling.
Well, in 77, we moved to Hawaii. We were transferred there. That was a tough assignment, something we really enjoyed. And I'd had a series of problems, health problems, and they put me on medication. I'd have side effects from the medication. So they put me on another medication. It was just crazy. So, and talking to a local gal, she said, there's a new doctor in town in Kailua, you might check with him. And it was John McDougall. And he had this was 1979, I think, that I met you, John. And you had just opened your office like a year before or close to that. And so I went in and what he said made sense to me. And so he showed me a video and there was a room with all these items you can buy in the store, healthier versions and so forth. And so I stayed in touch with him even after we moved. We were only there 5 years. And so I'd met him in 79. We left in 82 and continued to stay in touch whenever we went back to Hawaii and was watching him progress and getting attention for the information he was doing. And I just, as I say, it made sense. No doctor had ever talked about diet before. And so I appreciate all those years, John. We've stayed together and followed you, got every book, went on many of your trips. I mean, gosh, I think you went on 38. I looked at my list of trips that we went on with you. And those
you vacationed 38 times with Dr. McDougall?
Close to that. I think he did 38 trips and we were on probably 32 or 3 of those. Many places, Alaska, Belize, Brazil, Costa Rica, either on a cruise ship or a hotel stay, Galapagos, Guatemala, Hawaii, Big Island, and Kauai, Panama, and Peru. I mean, we did it. And of course, Costa Rica, we did many times, but it was enjoyable just to have that time with other people who were interested and hear John's lectures again. I mean, it wasn't all lectures. It was just one small part of the day that was a choice to listen to him, and everybody went to hear him speak. But the adventures, each day we had an adventure on all these countries that we went to. So it's been reinforced all along by hearing John. He never gives up. And we had great times.
Larry, how long have you been following the McDougall diet and what difference has that made in your health?
Well, whenever John convinced Ann she should be on a vegan diet, he said, now, you don't want to cook 2 different meals every night, so we've got to talk your husband into being a vegan. And so I spoke to John and I decided to go along with the program. While we were in Hawaii, eating out wasn't much of a problem because there's a lot of ethnic restaurants. You know, they have Japanese, Chinese, Thai, Filipino, so forth, and they all have a page of vegetarian items on their menu. The problem I had was that for my job, I was traveling all over every place. And so I had special meal problems there because when I would land, the program usually was they took me to the fanciest restaurant in town. And so to cope with that, I would find out in advance where we were going. And then I'd call up the restaurant and say, I need a special meal. I'm bringing important clients. I don't want to have a 30-minute conversation with the waiter. And I was surprised at upscale restaurants, the chef would be very accommodative because they were tired of cooking with what's on the menu and so forth. The other problem I had, then they wanted to take me home for their wife's cooking. And I would, rather than make a big deal out of the vegetarian thing, I would just say, hey, look, I have to get a physical every year. And then I'd blame it on John. I'd say, and my doctor said that I shouldn't be eating any red meat. And so don't worry about that. I'll just eat the vegetables and so forth. And most of them went along with that because they didn't want to see me drop dead at the dinner table and get blamed for it. And so, you know, and the big thing that he helped me with is the vacations, because Ann and I took a lot of overseas vacations, and frankly, we would spend half our time looking for something to eat, and we, you know, and so forth. And so on the McDougall program, we never really had a problem because we had really great food everywhere we went, and even had a 5x8 card that she got a Costa Rican to write down her requirements. First item says no leche. And so we just give them the card. Sometimes they'd laugh, you know, and so forth. So, you know, I have to say that if you want to know the truth, we would probably be dead by now if we hadn't met John, because you know, I grew up in the South, and you know what the Southern diet is. It's everything is deep fried. And then on my travels, I ate stuff that I didn't even know what it was, you know, so that all got corrected and, you know, has greatly contributed to our lifespan.
Yeah, we have more and more friends that have died, ones that are younger than us due to their bad diet. So it's scary when, you know, you're getting to that age where your friends are dying, especially your younger ones. And you think, you know, that didn't have to happen. That didn't have to happen, but they resisted the message, and you can only say so much and do so much. So, you know, but that's the thing as you get older, hearing all those stories. And now with the COVID thing happening as well, it just emphasizes it. I wanted to tell you also, I of course got all John's books, and this was the first one. He and Mary put it together, Making the Change. Enjoyed getting, that's how we got started, because there were no books back in the 70s that we knew of that guided us in eating a healthy diet. So poor Mary, I can imagine putting all those recipes together and all the ones she's done over the years for all the books they put out. It's just amazing. Great recipes. They've taken us through a lot. So I wanted to tell you about one of the adventure trips. Well, we had adventures on all the adventure trips, but one of them we were in, I think we were in Guatemala, John, and they had very loose arrangements at the airport. We had to go to some other place in a small plane, and they had this thing you went through to check to see if you had any stuff on you.
Metal detector.
You're right. And it wasn't even hooked up. Then they came out and they said they had so many people on the plane, they didn't have room for everyone. Could somebody come sit with the pilot? John is pilot, and he got to sit with the pilot. They took us to our next point of adventure on that. Anyway, it was funny. Everything was so loose with that monitor not working, unplugged. And then they asked somebody could go, anybody could sit with the pilot. Well, I'm sure they were relieved that John was a pilot already, but that was fun. Lots of adventures. And of course you get to a foreign country and, they had everything so well planned. I mean, I can't believe it. We were in remember that remote island in what lake was that? Anyway.
Lake Titicaca.
And there was an island that we went to and we get up to this little village, didn't even see any people. It was so tiny. And they had our vegan meal. Poor little Heather had gone ahead and made sure that all these places they'd been told what food we wanted, what we didn't want. And here we were in this remote island in the middle of this lake getting our McDougall food. I mean, it was fabulous. I don't know how they did it back then, especially. Yeah. I don't know if we could do it again, John, but they're wonderful memories that we had from those things. Unexpected, anyway.
Well, part of the population at Lake Titicaca lived on reed mats, like little islands out in the thing. And we were out there and John and I were going around and he went up to this guy and he says, "Why are all the women here so fat?" And when he said that, I took about 3 steps back and made like I didn't know John. And it turns out that the women don't get any exercise and all they eat is fish. So we got that mystery solved. But my favorite vacation story with John and Mary wasn't a McDougall trip. It was just a separate trip. We went to Australia to the Great Barrier Reef and spent a week on a dive boat. And the other couple we went with, the husband was obese. He was so fat that he had to have a special wetsuit made. And we got to this one site and they said, "Okay, there's sharks down here." And they asked me as I was getting ready to go, he said, "Are you afraid of the sharks? Are you going to go on down?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." And they said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Well, Ron is going down and the sharks eat the fat ones first. And I will have time to escape and get back to the boat." And so we went down and John had a underwater camera. And he wanted me to go over where these sharks were and turn my back on them and so he could take my picture with them. And so, needless to say, no such picture was ever made. But I was beginning to wonder about my friendship with John, for sending me in front of a bunch of sharks. But anyway, we did a lot of scuba diving and had a lot of adventures.
So do you guys have any health problems at all? And do you mind telling your age?
I'm 87. The years go by so fast, especially with the COVID thing happening. 87. I'll be 88 this coming year in October. And Larry will be, of course, 100 in next December.
Right.
Wait, Larry will be 100?
I mean, 90. Excuse me. Oh my God. I'm sorry. See?
She never was very good at math, you know that?
I do have low thyroid, but not real low. It's like, so I'm on a low dose of whatever you take for the thyroid. And I take a B12 and that's it. Now there's one other thing I take. Anyway, yeah, so not too much, a little ache in my back, in the low back, but I go to a massage person and I do exercises for that area and for my whole body. So we walk every day, which I think is important at our age to keep moving. And then I do a cardio and yoga class also. So I try to keep the body moving. And, when that back is bothering me, I just lie down for a little bit, let those muscles relax. So I'd say really the main thing is the thyroid, and there's a mechanical heart thing, but it's not a big issue. So, yeah. And Larry?
Well, I take B12, and then every once in a while I get GERD, so I take Tums. So that's about the extent of my problems.
Yeah.
And
Well,
people
people
ask
are
me
saying that you look amazing, Jacqueline. who's
People ask me if I have problems, and I say, well, I said, I still have all my original parts, but they're way out of warranty and could fail at any time. So, so I've got high school and college classmates that have a laundry list of problems. And I went to one high school reunion and I was sitting around talking to my classmates that I played football with. And they were complaining that they couldn't get up the steps because their knees were bad and, you know, everything. And I said, well, look, here's what let's do. Let's all put $100 in the pot and the last person standing gets it all. And there was silence. And then one of my classmates said, Larry, we may talk slow, but we're not stupid. We're not putting $100 in the pot with a California vegan exercise nut. So we don't have a bet. They wouldn't bet.
Yeah.
Dr. McDougall, do you have any questions for Larry and Ann?
Oh, no, I've known Larry and Ann for almost 50 years. And we're good friends. One thing you need to know is they owned the fanciest, most prestigious vegan restaurant in the world in San Francisco called the Millennium. And so they made a lot of contacts there and they put a lot of important messages out to the public. But I used to go to lectures and Larry and Ann would be there. And I would make Larry stand up and I'd say, this is what I want to look like when I'm his age. It just never
One
stops.
time at a conference, he asked Ann and I to stand up, and Ann stood up, and he said, "Where's Larry?" She said, "I think he's in the room watching football." And that got a laugh and an embarrassing situation.
We had an amazing time together. And you know what might be fun, at least would be fun for us, is just to get many of the people who traveled with us, and there are probably 3,000 people that have traveled with us over the period.
Right.
Of time. And get some of the repeaters together and just talk about the fun we had on all these adventure trips, like going down the Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Barge, an air-conditioned barge. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
we'll never forget. We'd never be able to redo. And I don't know whether it'd be of interest to anybody else, but if we
that would be.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
we've had a wonderful time together.
Yeah. On that Amazon trip, they asked if I wanted to go fishing, and I said, sure. And so we got in a little boat, and there were about half a dozen of us. And they took us this thing, and I said, what are we fishing for? And they said, piranha. And I said, what's our bait? And they said, raw meat. So they hooked up this thing, and I got the first piranha, and I was ringing it in, and I tried to reach over and get the line, and I missed it. And the piranha went over and fell in the lap of one of the women that were there.
Barbara, I can't think of her last name.
I saw her a half a dozen times after that, and she always said, "You're the one. Put the piranha in my lap." You know.
That's great. Well, you guys look amazing, and I've met you, and I know you really are amazing. So thanks.
You should know they not just look good. I mean, Larry's out riding his bicycle, and he had snow skiing with his grandkids. You know, this is a man that not only looks the part but lives the part. And Ann too. I mean, she walks out there in the morning with him, and they just do really well. And you know how the saying goes is, if I know I was going to live so long, I'd have taken better care of myself. Well, these two did. They took good care of themselves, and they've lived a long time.
That's all thanks to you, John.
Well, I appreciate that. I never get tired of hearing that I helped other people, particularly my good friends, and Ann and Larry are some of our best friends. But thanks for having them on, AJ. That was really nice.
It was at your suggestion. Thank you so much, Larry and Ann. We hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care. Well, So now we have the man of the hour, Dr. John McDougall. And guys, he's going to be coming on not just once a month on Mondays, but he is going to come on twice a month because he has a lot of new lectures and he wants to test drive them on you guys. So aren't we honored to have him here talking about diabetes and what he would tell you if he were your doctor?
Right. I'm going to do a series. It's McDougall's Medicine. It's something I always dreamed about doing. Originally, I had it set up as an office situation where I would hire a model, have this person come in and act as the patient, and then talk about how I would take care of this particular person and have it filmed with the idea that other people might be interested in what I would say to a person in an office setting, because, just realistically, I wouldn't be able to get to everybody. Well, that was the original thought, and it's kind of smoldered in my brain for all this time. And finally, I figured out it could be done over the internet in a more powerful way. So we started out with the first lecture on precocious puberty and how your hormones get changed with a diet. And that's available on YouTube, and it's on our channel as well as on AJ's channel. And then the lecture I gave last time was on breast cancer, all the things I'd want to have a patient who had breast cancer know and are told. And so I'm going to do this whole series. This one's going to be on diabetes. These are the things that if I had a chance to sit down with you, I was the doctor, you were the patient. These are the things I want to tell you, the things that I believe. Whether you end up believing them or not, it's not the important thing. I think you need to be armed with the information that I have. And then you can reference that information with what other doctors say and decide what you want to do, decide what makes sense to you. And so this lecture will be on diabetes today. Then we're going to do one on autoimmune diseases, one on osteoporosis, one on heart disease, probably one on cancer, other kinds of cancers. And it's just going to be a whole series that we have set up. And AJ, I want to thank you very much for giving me the audience, because it's so much more realistic for me to know that I'm talking to people as opposed to just sitting in front of a screen. And hopefully it'll bring me to life. Anyway, we'll try. So I'd like to tell you about diabetes. I'd like to tell you about all the things that I'd like to tell you if we had a chance to sit down together, if I had a chance to be your doctor. And these things should be the things that you have. Your doctor should be telling you these things. This is a frank discussion a doctor should have with anyone facing a life with diabetes. You need to know these things. And I realize that some of this gets a little bit complex, but if you'll bear with me, I'll explain it to you, I think, in a manner that you'll easily understand it. It may take a few different repetitions of some of the same material. Plus, you're going to have the recording of this so you can go back and listen to it. Plus, I put a lot more information on the slides than I'm able to communicate with you. And if you just go back and look at the slides, you'll get a whole different perspective, an important addition to what words I said to you. Plus, I cited the scientific literature. And although I may go through the studies quite quickly, because quite honestly, you don't need to know all the details, most of you, but you need to know they exist. And for those of you who are more discerning, those of you who really want to know what's going on, you can look up these studies. Most of them are available without charge on the internet. So there's a whole bunch of information coming your way. Please bear with me, and we'll get through this all together. Diabetes. Well, the main criterion for diabetes is that the blood sugar rises above normal. Then you're diabetic. But there are two kinds of diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2. For both kinds of diabetes, the signs are, the most readily available signs are, when you check your blood sugar, it's above 126 milligrams per deciliter. When I started in medicine, it was over 200 milligrams per deciliter. That was the definition for diabetes. And then it went down to 160 milligrams per deciliter, and then 140 milligrams per deciliter. Oh boy, I wondered why the definition was changing. Well, I soon realized that the lower you make the number to call somebody diabetic, the more people you get into the business. So it's a way of opening up your customers to a greater number of them. Few people would meet the criterion of 200 milligrams per deciliter, and more at 160 milligrams per deciliter, a lot more at 140 milligrams per deciliter. And now they're down to 126 milligrams per deciliter. And there are doctors out there that would treat you if your blood sugar was above 100 milligrams per deciliter. They would tell you that you have prediabetes and we need to nip it in the blood with these drugs. Hemoglobin A1C, which is a long-term measurement, as you become diabetic when it's above 6.5%. Now, symptoms of diabetes are shared between type 1 and type 2. You have an increased urinary output, and that's accompanied by an excess of thirst. Another thing that happens, and I know many of you who are type 2 diabetic in particular, you look forward to this one, and that is you lose weight easily. But you can lose an excess amount of weight to the point where friends and relatives are worried about you. So those are the symptoms of diabetes, but more important are the complications, and that is that heavy diabetes, you suffer from a metabolic handicap, and the result is damage to all the tissues in your body, but particularly to the eyes, kidneys, nerves, and heart. You measure the blood sugar level either by taking the glucometer and sticking it in your finger or on your finger, and you get a value that is in terms of milligrams per deciliter. And if it's above 100 milligrams per deciliter, as I mentioned, it's considered abnormal. At 126, it'll be frankly diabetic. Hemoglobin A1C, well, this is a long-term measurement. You know, you're taking the instantaneous reading with a blood sugar measurement. But if you want to find out how the sugars have been controlled over a long period of time, say 2 or 3 months, what you do is you look at the hemoglobin A1C level. Now, less than 6% is considered normal, but levels can rise as high as 14%. I've known about this for a long time. I've talked about glycosylated hemoglobin back in my book that I wrote in 1985, and this diagram is actually from that book. And here you see a protein molecule that does not have a bunch of sugars attached to it on the left. And then because of high amounts of sugar in the blood, these sugar molecules get attached to the protein. In this case, we're talking about hemoglobin. And once the sugar gets attached to the protein, the whole molecular environment changes and you distort the protein. And this may be one of the major mechanisms that leads to these serious complications in the eye and the kidney and throughout the body, is these distorted proteins. So you want to keep the hemoglobin A1C down to a normal level, which is, let's just say 6%. That would be the amount of hemoglobin that is glycosylated, which is represented by a percent. Now, this will take a little bit of time, and I'm going to go through this with you in several occasions as we progress through the slide presentation. What I want to talk to you about is how blood sugar gets from your table into your intestinal tract, into your bloodstream, and then into the cells. We're going to talk about, first of all, normal situation, no diabetes at all. In this situation, you have lots of insulin that works well, and you have lots of receptors on the cell that are very active. If we'll start at the top, what you see is the key. Insulin acts as a key to activate glucose transport receptors. You've got to have the insulin for your transporters to work. The bar that you see there in red is an inactive glucose transport receptor, and the one that looks like a Y is an active glucose transport receptor, and the blood sugar is represented by the orange triangle. So let's take a look at the first situation where you have somebody without diabetes, somebody who's functioning normally, somebody who's healthy. What you see is the insulin is acting as a key to open up the receptors and allow them to work, and the receptors are taking in the glucose and allowing the glucose to pass through the cell wall and get into the cell. That's a normal situation. We'll talk about the other ones as we go along. Let's talk about type 1 diabetics. Type 1 diabetics are just a smaller percentage of diabetics. Certainly less than 10% of diabetics are type 1, probably far less than 5% are type 1, which means that 95% of diabetics are the other kind, which is type 2. In type 1 diabetes, let's go back to this same graph here, the same image. And what you see in type 1 diabetes is you see plenty of sugar. The person's eating, the sugar goes into the bloodstream. There's lots of sugar around, and the cells are ready to accept these sugars and allow the sugars to pass into the cell where the sugars provide energy. But in this case, you don't have the keys to open up the cell wall. You don't have the insulin. And so as a result, the cells are starving because no sugar can get inside. This is a deadly condition that people develop, type 1 diabetes. And of course, you have to supply supplemental insulin in this case, otherwise the person becomes very sick and dies. Type 1 diabetes is due to destruction of the beta cells on the pancreas. The beta cells are insulin-producing cells. And this occurs through an autoimmune reaction where the body attacks itself. How stupid the body to attack itself. Yeah, but it does. And the reason it attacks itself is this, is animal proteins, they pass through the gut into the bloodstream. They're not supposed to do that intact, but sometimes they do intact. So you've got whole animal proteins. In this case, what we're talking about is the beta casein on the milk protein. This milk protein gets into the bloodstream and the body says, hey, this is a foreign substance. This could be a virus or a bacteria. I must make an antibody against it to destroy this foreign invading substance, which in this case is cow's milk. Well, the antibodies that are produced against cow's milk find similar structures on the beta cells of the pancreas. Yeah, and they get confused. They go and try and attack the cow milk protein, which is floating around the bloodstream, but they end up attaching to the surface of the cells that produce insulin. And in that manner, they destroy the pancreatic cells. That's how you develop type 1 diabetes, is through this autoimmune reaction. It's called molecular mimicry, if you want to look it up. And eventually it takes somewhere between 3 and 7 years. Eventually the pancreas is so destroyed that you're making insufficient amounts of insulin and probably no insulin at all. And so you have to supplement. In other words, you have to take insulin through a shot. These similar parts, the parts of protein that are similar between the cow's milk and the surface of the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas, are 17 amino acids. They are the same amino acids on the cow milk protein, the same amino acids on the surface of the beta cells of the pancreas. And so, well, the body, the antibodies, which are produced by the lymphocytes, are looking for the cow milk protein. They find, in addition, they find the same structure of 17 amino acids on the surface of the insulin-producing cells, and they attach to them, and they destroy them. If you want to read the original paper on this, it was published in 1992. They identified the 17 amino acids that are shared between cow's milk and you. And in the process of the body doing something normal, which is to defend itself from an invading foreign substance, it destroys your tissues. So how do you treat type 1 diabetes? Well, I take care of a lot of people with type 1 diabetes. In fact, I have to say it's one of the more fun doctor-patient relationships that I get involved in, most rewarding. Because here you take a look at people who have a difficult life ahead of them. They have all kinds of complications that they face. Within 11 to 17 years, most diabetics have developed serious disease to the eyes, to the kidneys, to the feet, or they've died. So if you could take and you can fix these people by putting them on the right amount of insulin and feeding them a good diet, the rewards are tremendous. Not just for the patient, but for the physician who needs to help people. So when I have somebody who comes in with type 1 diabetes, they're on insulin, they're going to stay on insulin. But we're changing their diet, and as a result, what happens is their insulin works more efficiently. So I have to cut their insulin dose, and usually I cut it by a third or to a half. And it's better to err on the side of too little. You can always add more insulin, but too much insulin can result in serious adverse effects, particularly hypoglycemia. And if you become too low in your blood sugar, in other words, hypoglycemic, what happens is you get confused. You can actually lose consciousness. And as a result of this confusion, what happens is you could get involved in an auto accident. You could be accused of a DUI. And you also subject yourself to injuries. Now, when I take care of somebody with type 1 diabetes, I do it in various regimes as far as their insulin dosages go. First of all, these people are never on pills or shouldn't be. They're on insulin only. And what I try and do is I try to minimize the time that a patient spends treating themselves during the day. And in some of these regimes, you have multiple injections that occur throughout the day, 4, 6, or more times you're injecting insulin. You're checking your blood sugars, you're making adjustments and so on. That's an awful lot of time spent worried about your blood sugar levels and what kind of dose of insulin you're going to give. So what I try and do is make it as easy as I can for the patient, and I give them long-acting insulin. And my favorite one is Lantus, but there are other ones. And I strive to pick the right dose so they only have to take 1 shot a day. This may not be possible. They may have to take 2 shots of Lantus a day. And in some cases, they may have to add shorter acting insulin, but that's not my goal. I want to avoid hypoglycemia, but I want to give them enough insulin so that they're in good health and they can get plenty of sugar to pass into their cells so their cells are not starving to death. Now, of course, we only make this change in insulin dose after people get on the diet. And that's when I drop the insulin dosage by 1/3 to 1/2. All right, let's talk about type 2 diabetes. This is the kind of diabetes that you can cure. In fact, you should expect to cure it. Type 2 diabetes, here we go back to the same image. And you see in type 2 diabetes, what you have is you've got plenty of sugar in the bloodstream. Of course, people with type 2 diabetes, they have elevated blood sugar levels. And you have insulin that's present. In fact, sometimes the insulin is present to a level that is twice as much as a normal person. There's loads of insulin around. The problem is that the transport receptors are inactive. The body has developed insulin resistance, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. And so as a result, even though there's plenty of sugar, there's plenty of insulin around, loads of insulin that the body produces. What happens is the sugar can't get into the cells because the cells have developed insulin resistance. And that's type 2 diabetes. Do recall that I said that a type 2 diabetic has as much insulin and sometimes twice as much insulin as somebody without diabetes. Your lifetime risk of developing type 2 diabetes is about 40% for men and women. If you are a person of color, Hispanic, or Black, then your risk of developing diabetes is higher. It could be as high as 50%. But it's not because of anything that is metabolic or genetic. It has to do with your living situation. And I have to say right off is that people of color, your Hispanics, your Blacks, they have less opportunity, less education, less opportunities to eat a healthy diet. And as a result, they end up more overweight with more various kinds of diseases, including strokes, pancreatic or prostate cancer, all kinds of problems. But it's unique to these particular populations of people, not because of their color. No, it has to do with the social economic environments that they're involved in that causes them to have this inordinate excessive rate of type 2 diabetes. If you look at people who follow various diets, you see their risk of getting type 2 diabetes varies drastically. Your typical American diet, your non-vegetarian diet, you have a very high risk of developing type 2 diabetes. If you improve on this diet a little bit and you're semi-vegetarian, you have a reduced risk of diabetes. If you have a vegetarian diet with fish, even better, and a lacto-vegetarian diet. Remember, we're not talking about type 1 diabetes, we're talking about type 2 now. So the dairy issue is not important. You have a reduced risk of getting type 2 diabetes, and of course a vegan, which is the kind of diet that we promote. And there are a lot of high-fat vegan diets that this doesn't apply to. If we had a bar for somebody who ate a low-fat vegan diet, like the type of diet that I recommend, you'd find that the risk of type 2 diabetes is essentially zero. Around the world, as people become wealthier, you have populations living in these particular countries developing obesity, heart disease, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, and more and more and more diabetes. And the studies, what we find is that the incidence of type 2 diabetes in China in 2018 was 12.4%. The incidence of prediabetes in China in 2018 was 50%. Half the population is pre-diabetic. However, before 1980 in China, fewer than 1% of the Chinese population had type 2 diabetes. Before 1980, 90% of the Chinese diet was white rice. And they didn't have diabetes. But in 1980, things changed for China and a lot of other nations around the world. They become wealthier. They took advantage of the harnessing of fossil fuels and the Industrial Revolution and all the technology out there. They listened to cable news and learned about how people of wealth, such as Americans, lived, and they wanted to emulate that particular kind of lifestyle, and they have. China is one of the richest nations on this planet. And that wealth has been translated into a diet that makes them overweight and sick, including diabetes. Now, I want to explain to you that type 2 diabetes is really not a disease. It's a normal adaptation which gives you advantages to survive. When late fall and winter approach, there's less food. And a good thing to happen to get ready for this time of less food would be to store extra fuel. And the body does that. It stores it as body fat so you can make it through times of near famine. That's normal. That's a survival advantage. And that allows you to maybe gain 30 to 50 pounds, but not more than that. You know, that's enough to get you through the winter. Not more than that, so it becomes a disadvantage. And the way the body accomplishes this is it develops insulin resistance. In other words, the body does not transfer the blood sugar from the blood into the cells readily because there's a decrease in glucose transporters. This is normal. This is natural. But what's not normal and what is not to the advantage as far as your survival is concerned is to become morbidly obese. That's puts you in a situation where you are easy prey from the saber-toothed tiger. You know, if you were to gain an extra 100 pounds and sometimes as much as 800 pounds because you didn't develop insulin resistance, which is the normal situation. And I see people who do this. I see patients who weigh 500 pounds. I've seen news stories where they had to take a forklift into the bedroom of a patient that weighed over 1,000 pounds. What happened is these people did not develop insulin resistance, which would protect them from morbid obesity. You know, from becoming a size where you couldn't climb up a tree and get away from the saber-toothed tiger, to a size where you couldn't get into the small opening of the cave. So it's normal and natural. It's an adaptation to develop insulin resistance, which we call type 2 diabetes. It's not in the classic sense of disease or something going wrong with the body. Nothing wrong with the body. It's doing what it's supposed to do. So how do we treat type 2 diabetics? Well, they've got plenty of insulin. They've got plenty of blood sugar. So what I do is when I see somebody with type 2 diabetes is I stop the medication. I stop all of their insulin, or at least most of it. And I have some people who see me who weigh as much as, or are taking as much as 120 units of insulin a day. I know you think this sounds brave for me to do this, but I know, first of all, that the oral medications are medications that are used for non-insulin dependent diabetes, which is type 2 diabetes. type 2 diabetes is described as non-insulin dependent. It means that you don't have to take insulin. You don't have to take pills. The pills are dangerous, as we're going to talk about. And so it's important to get people off the medication so that they feel normal, act normal, and can get healthier. But just treat it with a healthy diet. And of course, that healthy diet is a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. All right, now I want to talk to you about something that's within the spectrum of diabetes. You know, you have the type 1 where you're not making any insulin. You have the type 2 where type 2 diabetics where you have loads of insulin. And then you have something in between. You have partial insulin insufficiency. You make enough insulin to keep yourself out of the hospital, keep from dying with ketoacidosis, but you don't make enough insulin to keep the blood sugar normal. And let's take a look at this. You see the situation with type 1.5 diabetes or partial pancreatic insufficiency. You see that situation where you've got some inactive receptors and some active receptors. You've got plenty of insulin, you've got plenty of sugar in the bloodstream, but not enough sugar gets into the cells. Too much sugar stays in the bloodstream, which is measured as an abnormally high blood sugar level. That's type 1.5 diabetes. And that's what confuses a lot of people. People will come into my practice and they'll go on a healthy diet and they'll lose a lot of weight, which, as you'll learn in a minute, cures most of people with type 2 diabetes. They'll lose a whole bunch of weight and still their blood sugar is elevated. Well, it's because your pancreas is not functioning as well as it should, and your cells have developed partial resistance. And as a result, you have type 1.5 diabetes. And the way we treat this, well, I treat type 1.5 diabetes is kind of a hybrid between just food and taking insulin. What I do is I give them enough medication so they won't end up in the hospital. And that medication is always insulin. It's never oral medication. It's never pills of any kind. Never shots that are not insulin shots. It's only insulin to take care of these people with type 1.5 diabetes. And you have to pick a dose. And picking the dose is just a guess, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I see somebody, I take a look at them, I listen to their history of what their blood sugars have run, you know, how overweight they are, and I take a guess, you know, how much of pancreatic insufficiency do you suffer from? In other words, how much supplemental insulin will I have to give you? Well, most of these people, I drastically reduce the insulin that they're taking, or probably most of the time I stop the insulin that they're taking, and I will add it back if necessary. And again, it's better to err on the side of too little medication rather than too much. You know, too much medication could result in severe hypoglycemia, brain damage, eye damage. You know, it's a big deal to overtreat. So say I take a guess as far as how much insulin I need to give somebody with type 1.5 diabetes, enough medications so that they don't end up in the hospital, enough medications so that their blood sugars are maybe a little bit better, but not normal. Well, this person, after a while, what happens is they may develop too much weight loss. Remember, insulin not only drives sugar into regular cells, but it drives fat into fat cells. And if you don't have enough insulin or it's not working efficiently, what happens is you end up losing weight because fat is not being allowed into your fat cells. Now, with the elevated blood sugar, what happens is you develop frequent urination, which can be troublesome, and that's accompanied by excess of thirst. But another issue that causes me to treat people with type 1.5 diabetes is everybody's worried about them. You're worried about your blood sugar numbers because they're elevated. Your mother-in-law is worried about your blood sugar levels. Your doctor's worried about your blood sugar levels. And so is your dietitian. Well, one way to get rid of the worry is to put you on a little bit of insulin. Then everybody thinks that all is going well. You're being treated by a doctor who really knows and cares. So I'll add a little bit of insulin to those circumstances too. But believe me, If you have partial pancreatic insufficiency, in other words, type 1.5 diabetes, you're at risk of becoming way too thin. And you may need an extra amount of insulin to allow the fat to get into your fat cells. But remember, not so much insulin that you develop hypoglycemia and get into big trouble there. That low blood sugar, that hypoglycemia causes brain damage, eye damage, and other damages to the body. All right, I want to share with you some facts that you may not realize are true. And that is weight loss from any approach cures type 2 diabetes. Now, the common approaches for losing weight that are not the McDougall approach is you can diet. In other words, you can restrict the amount of food that you eat, and then you suffer the pain of hunger. Or you can lose weight with bariatric surgery. In other words, the doctor can come in and rearrange your intestinal tract so that you lose weight. Well, surgery is painful. Surgery costs money, and there are lots of risks from surgery. And then you can lose weight from a low-carb diet. That's the opposite of the McDougall diet. But you must realize that the way you lose weight on a low-carbohydrate diet is you become sick. But the first approach that I want to talk to you about is calorie restriction, dieting. And what happens is the doctor may say to you, if you just lose weight, Mabel, if you just lose weight, your diabetes will go away. And you believe it, and it's true. Just weight loss will cause your diabetes to improve or go away. So here's the situation. You go to see a doctor, and the doctor says, Mabel, you're going to get rid of your diabetes by losing weight. I want you to follow this diet I got from GlaxoSmith Drug Company. One of the representatives came in and gave me a one-page sheet that teaches you how to diet. So I want you to follow this diet. I want you to lose some weight, but because your blood sugar's up, I must put you on medications, and these medications cause weight gain. Insulin does. So do many of your other medications that raise the insulin levels. Remember, insulin forces fat into fat cells. So here you leave the doctor's office with instructions. You're supposed to lose weight. You were given a diet. You're supposed to take the medications. Well, the medications cause you to gain weight. So you go back to see the doctor the next month, and the doctor says, hey, Mabel, get up on the scale. And the doctor walks over to the scale and says, hey, you have gained weight. I told you to lose weight. And now your blood sugars are higher. Now I've got to give you more medication. And you get into this vicious downhill struggle. The pills are causing you to gain weight. You hardly stand a chance of losing weight by certainly calorie restriction. To stop this vicious cycle, what I do is I stop the medication. I stop the main cause for people gaining weight. As a result, they start losing the weight, and yes, they can cure their type 2 diabetes, not type 1, but type 2 diabetes, just by losing weight, and that can be accomplished by dieting. Bariatric surgery. There's been a tremendous amount of research done. Of course, this is a very profitable business, so what would you expect? And what is found by causing surgically induced malabsorption and sickness? They rearrange your stomach, they put bands, they put sleeves, all kinds of things to make your intestinal tract abnormal so that your eating behavior will not result in obesity. In fact, you'll lose weight. And these studies have found that 78% of people cure their diabetes just with the weight loss caused by bariatric surgery. So it's almost 100% curable by just losing weight. Low-carb diets like the Atkins diet cause people to lose weight. They initially lose water weight. They lose 6 to 8 pounds when they stop eating any types of sugar. They burn their glycogen off, which is stored in their livers and muscles, and they'll go and lose about 6 to 8 pounds of water. And then what happens if you stay on the Atkins diet for a little longer, you go into ketosis. That's one of the main principles of the Atkins low-carb diet is you need to go into ketosis, which is described by many people as a state of bliss. It's not a state of bliss. It's a state of sickness. And so you end up losing weight, and as a result, your diabetes can get better. But I want to point out to you, these diets are very dangerous. I could provide for you 5 large reviews that have looked at the low-carb diets and show that these diets increase your risk of dying and suffering from heart disease. So, don't be fooled. Weight loss is just one of the things that's accomplished. I wrote an article that was published in Mayo Clinic Proceedings, and you could read that whole article if you want. It's on the right-hand side of the slide. But it was in response to somebody who was bragging about the benefits of a low-carb Atkins-type diet. They said, not only do you lose weight, but you lower cholesterol and blood sugar and triglycerides, and and in that way you can cause the patient to be healthier. And it's not just weight loss; they'll be benefited by having a reduction in risk factors, which can be translated into better health. Risk factors like cholesterol and triglycerides and blood sugar. Well, I pointed out in this particular letter I wrote, I said, you can also lose weight by taking cancer chemotherapy. Cancer chemotherapy. What happens is you lose weight, you get sick. Like with these low-carb diets, you get sick. And as a result of sickness, you don't eat. And your blood sugar comes down, your cholesterol comes down, your triglycerides come down. Yes, they do. Yeah. Similar benefits for similar reasons are seen when patients undergo cancer chemotherapy, like with the low-carb diets, and physicians do not brag about these results. Can you imagine if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, it's weight loss, and I can make you sick enough to cause you to lose weight? Well, you got the similarity there. So how do I take care of people who have type 2 diabetes? The thing that you need to know is you have to be very careful about the treatments that you use, because not only do diabetic drugs lower blood sugar, but they also kill type 2 diabetic patients. I tried to get some legislation passed in the state of California where the state of California would require that doctors put out an informed consent when they saw diabetic patients and they treated them with these medications. An informed consent will require that the patient be told that taking these medications will increase their risk of dying. Yeah. Well, let's talk about medications that are used. The first-line therapy for treating type 2 diabetics with medication we're talking about now is metformin. And oh boy, doctors think this is such a great drug because it doesn't cause weight gain and it may actually help the arteries. That's what they say. And more than half of the 58 million Medicare patients are on metformin for their non-insulin dependent, remember, you don't have to take insulin, type 2 diabetes. Well, it's highly questionable whether this medication is of any benefit at all. For example, a meta-analysis of the clinical trials that have done using glucose or those using glucophage metformin to treat type 2 diabetics, they couldn't rule out a 31% increase in all-cause mortality, nor could they rule out a 64% increase in cardiovascular mortality. In other words, the claim that it reduces your risk of dying of heart disease is just plain and simple not supportable. And this review in the British Medical Journal, what they concluded was the results of the study do not justify aggressive treatment of type 2 diabetes using metformin. Another study, a meta-analysis of randomized trials of people with type 2 diabetes using metformin and specifically looking at whether they reduce the risk of dying of strokes and heart attacks or having heart surgery. Well, the conclusion is there remains uncertainty about whether metformin reduces the risk of cardiovascular mortality. And I have to tell you, the idea that somehow metformin can help the arteries, the big arteries, like the ones that go to the heart and brain, and the small arteries that go to the retina and the kidneys and your peripheral nerves, is based upon the finding that only this finding, that eye damage is reduced based upon photographs of the eye, which are subjectively evaluated. That's it. It's not a reduction in dying of heart disease or strokes or having heart surgery. It's just based on these photographs of the retinas. Second line therapy is sulfonylureas. There's a whole list of sulfonylureas down there. About 30% of sales of diabetic medications are represented by sulfonylureas, which were also used as herbicides. Back in 1972, the physician's desk reference started coming out with warnings on all oral diabetic medications. These specific warnings started out with a statement at the beginning of the paragraph. This was in heavy black print at the beginning of the description of the drug in the physician's desk reference, which is a book that almost every doctor used to have on their table that they used all day long to determine the benefits and risks and hazards and costs and so on. Not costs, but benefits and risks and scientific studies and so on, to decide whether or not they were going to use a particular medication to treat their patients in heavy black print. Based upon the UGTP study, they found a rate of cardiovascular, that means strokes and heart attacks, mortality to be approximately 2.5 times that of patients who were treated with diet alone. And that warning has continued up to this date. These drugs are dangerous. There are 6 major studies, and only 6 have been done. And I'm going to show you these studies. You can go look them up later on. I'm going to give you the basic conclusions. These studies show that aggressive treatment for diabetes kills. Aggressive treatment, what that means is using lots of pills, using lots of insulin when necessary. I mean, sometimes they'd give the patient 4 shots of insulin a day, and they would check their blood sugar 4 or more times a day. They'd have them on 3 or 4 different kinds of medication. That's aggressive treatment. And the goal of aggressive treatment is to get the hemoglobin A1C down to about 6%. That's what they tried to do. So they did some randomized control trials, and one group got standard care. In other words, they didn't pay a lot of attention to their hemoglobin A1Cs, and they let them run approximately 8 to 9%. And the other group, the intervention group, they really treated them aggressively. And here are the results of the studies, of the 6 studies done. Oh, by the way, before I tell you this, you must understand that whether or not a drug was approved by the FDA to be used to treat diabetics depended upon whether or not it lowered blood sugar. Didn't have anything to do with whether or not the patient ended up healthier. I mean, you couldn't outright kill the patients with the drugs. But the main criterion as to whether or not you are able to advertise yourself as a diabetic medication is whether or not it lowered blood sugar. So here are the 6 different studies that have been done. You have the Diabetes Control and Complication Trial, which was published in 1998. And the conclusion is it may increase the risk of coronary artery disease in this subset of subjects with time. And then you had the Veterans Affairs Cooperative Study. They found a strong tendency toward worsening cardiovascular outcomes in patients with intensive control. When you aggressively treated the patient, more heart disease. And then they had the TRACE study, the largest European study ever done. And they showed an increase in mortality following acute myocardial infarction when you aggressively treated the patients. And then in 2008, the New England Journal of Medicine came out with 3 major studies that really put the nails in the coffins of the diabetic industry if scientists, doctors, politicians would have listened to the results of the study. These 6 studies, you have the ACCORD study, which was published in 2008. The Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute stopped this study 17 months early because of an increased risk of dying in the aggressively treated group. 17 months early, it was stopped. You have the ADVANCE study. The ADVANCE study showed no significant effects when it came to reducing the risk of major vascular events like strokes and heart attacks. No benefit. And hypoglycemia was much more common in the aggressively treated group. And then finally, and this is the last of the studies done, finally, we have the Veterans Affairs study. And what they found was that those who were treated aggressively gained an average of 18 pounds compared to 9 pounds with a standard group, and sudden death was 3 times higher. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no other studies of this level to help you to decide whether or not you're going to take these medications. Diabetic drugs kill. So a effort to reduce the hemoglobin A1C down to 6% resulted in a dramatic increase of poor outcomes, including death. Well, the control groups were 8 to 9%, the hemoglobin A1C, and with the intervention groups, they got close to 6% in these various trials. What did doctors do about this? Well, they knew you couldn't lower the hemoglobin A1C down to what is a normal level of 6%. That was just dangerous. And sometimes these hemoglobin A1C levels got up to 14%. So what are they going to do to come to recommendations for your doctors to treat you? Well, just based upon a hunch, just a guess, no data. I mean, there's no data that shows that somebody with a hemoglobin A1C level of 7 or 8% does better than somebody with a hemoglobin A1C level of 10 to 12%. We know they do worse when it's down to 6%. They proposed as a compromise, based on a guess, not data, that the goal your doctor should have for you to get your hemoglobin A1C is down to 7 to 8%. Huckaday made a very important statement back in 1987. He said, "It is important to remember that diabetic control means a lot more than blood sugar control. Not only do we have to control the blood sugar, we've got to keep the patient alive and healthy. We got to be concerned about them dying. We got to be concerned about them suffering from illnesses, heart disease, eye disease, and kidney disease." Well, industry responded, and they developed newer drugs that you see advertised on your cable news network, intensively advertised because they're so darn profitable. And they developed drugs that actually reduce the risk factors associated with cardiovascular disease, strokes, and heart attacks. But these particular drugs have other problems. And I'll show you the 3 classes of drugs that are done in the studies that evaluated their benefits as well as their troubles. In 2008, the Food and Drug Administration, they said, you ought to start paying attention to other things besides just lowering blood sugar. And they gave some guidance, nothing enforceable, nothing legal. They just told the drug companies that you probably should pay better attention, and they responded with these particular drugs. These are the drugs that have been advertised as reducing your risk of dying of heart disease and strokes, cardiovascular mortality. Yes, because as I showed you, the 6 major studies showed the other drugs dramatically increased your risk of dying of heart disease. So industry, bless their hearts, they decided that they were going to answer this call to make drugs that reduce risk factors associated with having strokes and heart attacks. So one of the studies that was done on this particular medication showed, this is Jardius medication. They showed that you reduce the risk of cardiovascular complications by 2.2%. That's all, 2.2%. Whereas they also increase the risk of genital infections and leg and foot amputations. Victoza, that's the one that's advertised a lot to you, 1.3% reduction, 1.3% reduction in cardiovascular complications, but it increased your risk of gastrointestinal problems, particularly pancreatitis, caused low blood sugar reactions, kidney damage, and thyroid cancers. And the last class of drugs What they did is they found that it reduced the risk of cardiovascular problems by a lousy 2.3%. But you ended up with more eye damage and with the possibility of blindness. These are very profitable medications, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they are promoted so much to you. But they fall way short of what you think the drug company should be able to do, or what you hope they'd be able to do for you. All right, I want to straighten out some other misinformation so I can talk to you about the proper way to treat diabetes. First of all, you need to understand that diabetes is not caused by sugar. It's not. We knew that a long time ago. We knew that in 1927 when Shirley Sweeney treated his medical students with various kinds of diets and then did glucose tolerance tests on them. And what you see along the x-axis, you see the times and you see the blood sugar levels along the y-axis. And what he did is he took the students, he fed them a diet that was very high in sugar. That diet consisted of table sugar, candy, pastries, white bread, baked potatoes, syrup, bananas, rice, and oatmeal. And all of his students tested non-diabetic. They were normal. And then he fed the same students a high-fat diet, olive oil, butter, mayonnaise, egg yolks, 20% cream, and all of his otherwise healthy students became diabetic based on the glucose tolerance test. Percival Hemsworth, he established this with beyond any doubt. There was a high-fat diet that caused diabetics to get worse, their blood sugars to get high, and that a high sugar diet, a high carbohydrate diet, resulted in normal blood sugars. And he published this data in the British Medical Journal in 1940. Percival Hemsworth is the father of diabetes. Brunzell did studies at University of Washington that were published in 1971 in the New England Journal of Medicine. What he did is he took type 2 diabetics and he started them out on a diet that was 45% simple sugar. And they weren't starches, they weren't complex carbohydrates, they were simple sugars, dextrans and maltose. And then what he did is he doubled the sugar intake to 85% of the calories from simple sugar. And what he found is every aspect of diabetes improved. Yeah. Fasting insulin was lower, glucose tolerance tests were lower, blood sugars fell, fasting blood sugars, every aspect of diabetes improved by doubling the amount of sugar fed to his test subjects. And what they conclude, these data suggest that a high carbohydrate diet increased the sensitivity of peripheral tissues to insulin. In other words, sugar makes insulin work better. Walter Kempner, Duke University, developed the rice diet, which is a diet of fruit juice, simple sugars, and white rice. And he got tremendous improvements in the health of his patients. But one of the things you need to note is they essentially cured 100% of type 2 diabetics with this diet. And here's the diet. Standard American diet is about 38%. The diet of rice and sugar was 2% fat, 4% protein, and 94% sugar. And in patients who needed to gain weight, they would often feed them 2,000 calories of white sugar to add extra calories to the diet. And yet the improvements in health in patients are not matched by any other diet or any other approach. Curing malignant hypertension, curing type 2 diabetes, curing or stopping the progression of kidney failure and heart failure. If you don't know Walter Kempner, you should learn about Walter Kempner. I talked about him in my December 2013 newsletter. Type 2 diabetics, when they were fed a diet of omega-3 fats, fish oils, what happened to their diabetes is it got worse. Oil paralyzes insulin, makes the cells more resistant to insulin. Sugar makes insulin work better. Now, how in the world are you going to get well if you don't know this, if you can't straighten out this this contrary information to what the truth is and what you've been told. You don't stand a chance. So when they fed omega-3 fats, fish oil supplements, what happened is the blood sugar increased by 22%, and the blood sugar after meals increased by 35%. Now that was type 2. And when they treated type 1 diabetics with oil or high-fat meals, it wasn't oil tablets or capsules, it was high-fat meals. What they found is that type 1 diabetics, those people who have to take insulin, what happened is their requirement for insulin increased. On the low-fat diet, they required 9 units. On the high-fat diet, they required 13 units of insulin. They require more insulin because fat paralyzes insulin activity. Now, just want to touch on the potato for just a minute because the potato has been so maligned. There are people out there that say type 2 diabetes is caused by eating potatoes. Well, the research really shows that if you eat fried potatoes, what happens is you have an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. But the final study, the final verdict was in this study that was published, which looked at non-fried potatoes and found out that they do not raise blood sugar levels. They do not cause diabetes. In fact, just the opposite. So let's talk about the low-fat diet that I use to treat type 2 diabetes. And my most important mentor as far as learning this diet so that I could help you with your care, it was Nathan Pritikin. And again, if you don't know about Nathan Pritikin, you can find out about him in my February 2013 newsletter, which is on my website. And the diet that I use is patterned after this pioneer, as well as several other pioneers in the field of medicine that came before me. Let's take a look at the history of using a high carbohydrate, like I recommend, low-fat diet and taking care of type 2 diabetics. This was by a man named Rabinovich, and he treated 500 patients. He had 16 failures. Patients were highly satisfied by using a high carbohydrate, low-fat diet. Back in 1930, he published this. He also said that patients would rather eat a healthy diet than to take insulin and to be underweight. They'd rather eat a healthy diet and cure their disease. This is back in 1930. I talked about Walter Kempner and his findings, which were published in the late 30s and during the 1940s and 50s. Essentially cured all the type 2 diabetics with a diet of white rice, fruit juice, and simple sugars. Pritikin, in his reports, Nathan Pritikin found that they were able to lower glucose levels from 183 to 150 milligrams per deciliter. They were able to decrease medication from their patients taking a total of 284 pills down to 75 pills. And on average, they reduced the shots of insulin from 280 to 158 injections. Or no, excuse me, the patients who required injections went down that level, injections of insulin. And then we have from the University of Kentucky, we have James Anderson, who published his work in the late 70s. And he put people on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, kind of patterned his diet off of Nathan Pritikin's work. And what they reported, this is one of the most respected universities and one of the most respected researchers in the world at that time. Insulin usage, the average reduced their amount of insulin from 26 to 11 units daily. And their diet was not as strict as the diet I recommended, the diet Nathan Pritikin recommended. And 11 of the 20 patients discontinued their insulin. David Jenkins from University of Toronto, he did an experiment where he put people on a vegetarian, low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet, and improvements in blood sugars in diabetics with 39% stopping their insulin and 71% stopping their pills. Neil Bernard, who is alive, well, and active for the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine, published a study recently in 2006 where he compared the American Diabetic Association diet with a vegan diet. It happened to be essentially our diet, the McDougall diet. And what they found is the hemoglobin A1Cs decreased down to minus 1.2, as opposed to an increase in the American American Diabetic Association diet. The vegan diet, as I mentioned, was a diet very similar to what I recommend, as opposed to the American Diabetic Association diet, which is a relatively high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. Nathan Pritikin used to say that the American Diabetic Association diet guarantees that all diabetics will remain diabetic. Yeah, that's what he used to say. And of course, we have our work, which is published recently, and we found nearly 90% of the 1,703 people that we studied and reported on were able to reduce or stop their diabetic medications. So how about, that's treating the diabetes. How about the complications of diabetes, which lots of people suffer from and would very much like to have improved? Problems with the blood vessels, the small blood vessels, problems with the eyes, problems with the kidneys, problems with the nerves. Let's take a look at the research here. Let me start by giving you a quote from Elliot Joslin of the famous Joslin Clinic. Many of you have heard about Joslin. He prophetically wrote in 1927 the following, and I'd like to read this to you. I believe the chief cause of premature atherosclerosis in diabetes, save for advancing age, is an excess of fat. An excess of fat in the body, obesity, an excess of fat in the diet, and an excess of fat in the blood. With an excess of fat, diabetes begins, and from an excess of fat, diabetics die, formerly of coma and recently of atherosclerosis. In 1927, he wrote this. And by the way, he continued by saying it shouldn't be long before, with good scientific study, we have this all figured out. Excuse me, it's been what? Almost 100 years. One of the complications of diabetes of both kinds is to have the retina of the eye be damaged. And the damage you see by looking inside of the eye, the damage you see here on the left, you see the white materials. These are exudates. And then you see the red flamed spots there. These are hemorrhages. And you see in this particular patient, just over a short period of time on a very low fat diet, they were able to reverse their diabetic retinopathy, which could have caused this person to go blind. And of the 44 patients that they studied, 20 of them showed this kind of improvement, dramatic improvement. And Walter Kempner wasn't the only one. A fellow by the name of Van Eck, he did similar studies using a low-fat diet and confirmed that you reverse diabetic retinopathy. And how is that treated these days? Well, with lasers. I prefer diet. The kidneys are affected by the kind of diet that you feed a person. A low-protein diet reduces the progression of kidney disease and death on average by 33 to 50%. You know, this has been known for 100 years. As far as pain in the feet, burning of the feet, numbness of the feet, which is called peripheral neuropathy, we have a couple of studies that should cause your interest. One was done at Weimar Institute by Milton Crane. What he found was complete relief of these peripheral neuropathies. The pain occurred in 17 of 21 patients put on a diet similar to what I recommend. And that occurred within 4 to 16 days, and their benefits remained for 4 years. So the message here is you can cure peripheral neuropathies, or at least benefit them. And there's no other treatment of any help out there. There's no drugs that solve this problem. And Neil Bernard, he published a study recently in 2015 on the effect of a healthy diet, a diet essentially the same as what I recommend. And he found that it helped with diabetic neuropathy. People got better. So to conclude, if you're a diabetic, type 1 or type 2, but particularly type 2, my question to you is, are you tired of being managed, switching from one drug to the next, waiting for the next complication to occur? Are you really tired of being treated the way that people are standardly treated in the medical system these days? Well, if you are, then you might look to the cure. The cure is a healthy diet and associated weight loss. It works. Costs you nothing. There are no side effects. And you can learn this diet free from my website, drmcdougall.com, or you can take the 12-day telemedicine, telehealth course that we teach, where you get support from our physician, support from our support staff, which meets you every morning and sees how you're doing, sees what your blood sugar is, works with you on the day's meal plan, where you can take advantage of multiple lectures from experts, the world's best experts: Doug Lyle, Jeff Novick, Anthony Lim. And you know what? I even lecture at the program. In fact, Mary and I have a chance to spend every morning with you at a fireside chat. It's a great program, folks. And the way you sign up for it is to go to our website. The next class is full. We end up filling up almost every class long before the time is due to start the class. But there are future classes that you can sign up for. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope I shared a few concepts with you on taking care of diabetes, how you can cure it, what causes it. And I'd like to open the audience for questions if we could.
That was so good, Dr. McDougall. That was amazing.
Well, I hope it caused you to have no faith and a lot of suspicion at the current way diabetics are treated.
Yeah, they're managed. That's it. Like you said, managed.
And with type 2 diabetics or type 1 diabetics, even though you can't cure their disease, they stop having complications. Type 1 diabetics, they're some of the most important people to treat with a healthy diet. Hello, Mary.
Hello. Hey, look who you got. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
They're some of the more important people to treat because their future is so dismal. They end up on dialysis machines. They end up going blind. All kinds of serious problems with type 1 diabetics. The only type 1 diabetics I've seen with all of their parts working after 50 years of disease were those who were taken care of by Walter Kempner on the rice diet. And I certainly think that the same will happen to type 1 diabetics that follow the McDougall diet. You'll have to take insulin, but you'll live a normal life with all your parts working and a normal length of life too. That's type 1 diabetes. And type 2 diabetics, you can plan on a cure. Guaranteed. Type 2 diabetes is 100% curable with a healthy diet and associated weight loss. Now, there's something in between. Remember, type 1.5 diabetes, which is, still is a disease that needs to be treated and managed with some medication. And people, of course, need to eat a healthy diet, regardless of what kind of diabetes you call it, type 1, type 1.5, or type 2.
You mentioned dialysis, Dr. McDougall, and one of the live viewers said that they are on dialysis. And would the starch solution be helpful?
The answer is yes. I would get the book, McDougall's Medicine, A Challenging Second Opinion. It's free. Just go to our website and you can pick up this book as well as the McDougall Program for Women. We're going to be offering at least 6 of the books that Mary and I have written for free over time. And that book is available and it talks to you about kidney disease and what the benefits would be. First of all, it's been known for 100 years that people who are on dialysis, they avoid meat. It stinks. They're repulsed by meat, and for very good reason. It's that meat makes them sicker, worse. Taking care of a person who's on dialysis is a difficult job because, not only are these people very ill, but they're also being managed by doctors and dietitians who have no understanding about a diet and its importance in kidney failure. And if they do have the slightest knowledge about it, they don't practice it. In fact, the typical scenario is when you go to see a nephrologist, a diabetic doctor, or a diabetic dietitian, you'll be sent off to the dietitian's office to learn about a low-protein diet. But you'll hear also that you're not going to follow it. it's too hard to work. You don't have to follow a good diet. Just come on over here in the back room here. I want to show you our dialysis ward. We're just going to attach you to this dialysis machine. And no matter what you eat, no matter how bad it is, we're just going to suck that stuff off. Well, it doesn't do that in no perfect way. And diabetics who have kidney failure, their chances of dying of heart disease are the greatest. With a healthy diet, you can reduce their chances of dying of heart disease, and yet, without a healthy diet, there's some of the most likely disease problems to die of heart disease. You'll also require less time on the dialysis machine. Instead of doing it maybe every day for several hours, maybe you could get down to 2 or 3 times a week. I think so. And there are some extra complications you have to deal with when you're dealing with the kind of diet I recommend. And kidney failure, like the potassium level in the food. You ought to be taught a low potassium diet. Phosphorus is also important. But the main issue as far as taking the workload off the kidneys, off the body, is to feed a low protein, high carbohydrate diet. And for those of you who haven't progressed to the point of requiring dialysis, my plea to you is get on the diet right now. Because on a healthy diet, you can slow or stop the progression of kidney disease of many kinds. Again, this has been shown over and over and over again. I've referenced many of the studies for you in the book, McDougall's Medicine, A Challenging Second Opinion. So it's particularly important for healthy people to follow the kind of diet I recommend. That somebody who's healthy, AJ, they will lose 25% of their kidney function by the time they reach 70 years of age, just from eating the normal American diet, the normal high protein American diet. But that's okay. You don't notice anything because you've lost 25% of your kidney function. You only require 25% of kidney function to discharge all the waste, to be clinically well. So you don't have to require much kidney. So people don't notice this. The way it becomes important is when people have lost a considerable amount of kidney. For example, they've donated a kidney. The donor has cut their kidney function in half, or they get in an auto accident, or they suffer from diabetes, or some type of poisoning to the kidney system. Then what happens is these people who have already compromised kidneys, the protein just raises havoc with them. It increases flows and pressures in the nephrons, which encourage the loss of kidney function. And if you aren't changed to a healthy diet, your loss of kidney tissue is dramatically increased. But by eating a good diet, a healthy diet, a high carbohydrate, which means, of course, a high starch diet, and a low protein diet, you can slow or stop the progression of kidney disease and stay off that dialysis machine.
Nice. Thank you, Dr. McDougall. And Richard, who's watching live, says, Dr. McDougall, do you think there's a day that will come where there will be a cure for type 1 diabetes?
Oh, this is mostly science fiction for me. I've been told that we'd have, mechanical devices which will solve the problem. And I want to talk about those mechanical devices in a second, or some kind of transplant of stem cells, or, transplant of organs to a person with type 1 diabetes. But again, I have to say this is science fiction, because in the 50 years I've been hearing this, nothing has really been accomplished. Now let's talk about the closest they've come to replacing the pancreas. And that's by continuous glucose monitoring. In other words, you have a sensor placed in or on your skin, which determines your blood sugar level as often as every 5 minutes. And then following that, the monitor may be connected to a pump. And then the pump pumps in a prescribed amount of insulin based upon your blood sugar readings. Well, there's all kinds of problems associated with these pumps and complications and the cost. The pump may cost as much as $5,000. The materials you used in terms of the monitors have to be replaced quite frequently, and they're expensive. And there's an increased risk of a whole bunch of problems. I'll tell you the biggest issue for me and people who are on these pumps and these monitors, these continuous evaluations and treatments, The biggest problem is that it destroys their life. Now, I try and get these people off of this type of system as quick as possible. I mean, their lives are being destroyed. Think about what's going on. If you check the blood sugar as frequently as every 5 minutes, maybe you don't do it that often, but every time you do, everybody wants to know what's your blood sugar level. And so you talk about blood sugar level. And then the next question they have is, how much insulin did you give yourself? And how are you feeling? Your whole life is spent focused on this machinery. You're not paying attention to the grandkids, your favorite book, your favorite friend. It's all about this machine. So anyway, I take people off these monitors and pumps as quick as I can, talk them into it. Of course, many people believe in high tech, and so it's kind of hard sometimes. And of course, the other doctors promote this kind of Star Wars technology. But I try and do that. In most cases, I can get them off of the insulin pump and get them on 1 shot of insulin a day, which is the Lantus insulin. And it may not end up as 1 shot a day. It may end up as 2 shots a day, or 2 long-acting shots a day, and maybe some extra short-acting insulin. I don't know. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to manage the problems, but I try and do it as simple as possible, which delivers the results that they're looking for, which is staying out of the hospital, keep from dying, feeling good. And as far as preventing complications, that has to do with what you eat. Yeah, what you eat, not how well you control your blood sugar level. It has to do with what you eat. In fact, I can show you that aggressive control of blood sugar. I did show you, but I can show you in type 1 diabetics, aggressive control of blood sugar causes hypoglycemia, which causes damage to the eyes and other tissues throughout the body. So I don't know how we got onto that question, but we did.
No, that's great. And there's a question from Rebecca. Why does insulin cause people to gain weight?
Well, because insulin's job is to open up the cells. It opens the cells, the regular cells in the body. It opens the cells so that sugar passes from the blood to inside the cell where it can be active. It also opens up the fat cells, the adipose tissue. The fatty cells, insulin opens them up and allows fat to get into the cells. So that's why, as I showed you, aggressive treatment of diabetes resulted in an 18-pound weight gain as opposed to 9 pounds. You can expect that if you're a type 2 diabetic, just like that lady I showed you on the scale, you can expect that you're going to gain weight no matter how hard you try, because you're on medications like insulin and many of the diabetic pills that increase the amount of insulin in your body, or how active the insulin is. You can expect to gain 20 pounds when you're started on medication, unless you take another approach, which is to follow a healthy diet, the one I recommend, a diet that is mostly starch with the addition of fruits and vegetables, and you reduce or stop the fat-inducing drugs. You just can't catch up with these medications, has been proven. So it's a dual approach. It's the healthy diet as well as sensible reduction in medications.
Great. And Kathy says, how much starch is too much?
I don't know how much starch is too much. I mean, I would be hard for me to imagine. But what I usually recommend is that when you look at your plate, by eyeballing, not by measuring, not by getting out a dietetic handbook and looking up the calorie content of various foods, is look at the plate. And 90% of the food you see on your plate is starch, pasta, breads, beans, potatoes, sweet potatoes, wheat, barley. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There must be 1,000 different starches. Starches are high carbohydrate, high calorie parts of plants. And that should be 90% of your diet, as opposed to non-starchy plant foods, green and yellow vegetables. They maybe be 5 or 10%. Non-starchy green and yellow vegetables would be things like onions and celery and kale and broccoli and cauliflower. You can't make the bulk of your diet these non-starchy green and yellow vegetables. You'll starve to death. For me to get enough calories from cabbage, I'd have to eat 11 pounds of cabbage a day. I don't have that kind of time. So just look at your plate. And besides that, you ought to feel good when you look at a plate of starch. You love starch. Pasta is comfort food. All these soups, these vegetable soups that are starch-based, they're eye appealing. Enough.
Nice. Sid sent in her question in advance, which we appreciate so much, viewers, when you do that. Dr. McDougall just sent out an email today titled "One Thing to Work on This Year," in which he suggested a gradual transition for people who don't want to change their diet all at once. That seems to be a turnabout. Is it correct that Dr. McDougall is now in favor of transition plans?
No, Dr. McDougall is not in favor of transition plans. I don't know in what context that was said, but I think it was said to the point of this, is that you get results that are proportional to the amount of change you make. And if you're not ready to make the change 100%, then any improvement will reap benefits. And you might as well get started. You're learning things. You're learning new foods, new shopping techniques, new ways to eat out if you still eat out in this world. You're learning new things. But when it gets to the point where you say, "I've had enough. I'm tired of being fat and sick. I've had enough," and then you got to go 100%. There's no room for moderation there. It is when you made the decision that you want your life back, then you just got to do it. You get the animal foods and the oils out, and you put the potatoes and sweet potatoes and corn and rice, et cetera, the starches into the diet. And voila. I mean, the benefits are always there. It's not like this sometimes works. This always works. This is a major change. Big changes beget big results. We're a big deal.
Do you want me to look? You want me to look
What?
at the email?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
I believe it.
Thank you. We love when you send the questions in advance, though, guys. We give them priority. And Deborah said that she loves the lectures that you're doing on my channel and was wondering, since you did a 2-part series on protein and the potato, would you ever consider doing a 2-part series on fat?
No, I actually have a 4-part series on fat that's all ready to go. But, I got involved in this McDougall's Medicine thing, and I really wanted to put that out first. But yeah, it's in the can, so to speak. It's a lecture that I put together, which has way too many slides to give us one lecture. And I've divided into at least 3 segments. The chemistry of fats and how fats affect the body, and the dietary treatment of the low-fat diet. Those are the 3 parts. So it's ready. It's just a matter of fitting it in. When we get done with this series, maybe I'll do it.
That sounds great. Thank you. And Danny sent in a question. He lost 60 pounds being whole food plant-based, but now he's losing his hair and has thinning hair. I've heard that from people that have lost weight. They're saying that he's taking vitamin biotin, C, D, etc. Have you heard of people losing hair when they've lost weight?
Women, I've heard women say so, but otherwise, I don't think it's related to the diet. And at least the kind of diet that we recommend. There's a Dr. Naba, and you can find his paper in the McDougall Program, 12 Days to Dynamic Health, which is a book you still have to purchase. In that book, I talk about Dr. Inaba's work. And the way I became familiar with Dr. Inaba, which was a Japanese doctor, is one of my friends who was a dermatologist. He found this article in Oncology Dermatology, whatever magazine that is. And he brought it to me about Dr. Inaba's work, and I think he was just trying to tease me. It was titled, "Can You Grow Your Hair Back?" And I started reading about Dr. Inaba's findings, and he went through World War II, and he pointed out that prior to the end of World War II, there was no male pattern baldness. And then after World War II and the change to a more Western diet, male pattern baldness became more common, not as common as it is in the rest of the world, in the Western diet, but it became more common. And then he explained how a change in diet affects your hormones, particularly your testosterone, and how hair loss is related to testosterone. In fact, many of the treatments that are out there are to use anti-testosterone drugs. So once Dr. Inaba explained that, I figured he's got to be right. I was living in Hawaii at that time with Mary, and we do a lot of mingling with the tourists, and we'd see people come from Japan. And then, of course, we saw the native population of Hawaii of Japanese descent. And I quickly observed that the older gentlemen from Japan who still maintained a rice-based diet had a beautiful set of hair. They were never bald. And whereas my Japanese descended patients who lived in Hawaii and switched to the Western diet, they were just as fat and greasy and bald as blacks and whites. And, so just the opposite of what you're noting. However, I do note that in women, that whenever they change their hormones, like when they start the periods or they end their periods, menopause, or they get pregnant or they start breastfeeding or stop breastfeeding, end of pregnancy, whenever they change their diet, what happens is they temporarily lose hair. And they notice it on the brush, and this stops. I've never seen anybody go bald, at least any woman go bald, as a consequence of losing a few hairs on their brush every day. So yeah, but I think most of what this person is observing is just coincidental. As you get older, if you happen to be on a high-fat diet and you have a genetic tendency, you're going to be losing hair. And whatever happens to people when they're on a healthy diet, the kind of diet I recommend, it's a consequence of the diet. I mean, if you drop a bowling ball on your foot, well, I must have gotten confused because I ate all those starches and I dropped the bowling ball on my foot. Everything is due to the diet. Believe me, if you don't come to that conclusion, your mother-in-law will.
Nice. Thank you. Here's a question about sugar that was sent in from Carol. She said, could you please ask Dr. McDougall about my having regular sugar in my decaf coffee compared to using pureed dates or maple syrup? Is the regular sugar really that different in how my body reacts to it? Will I develop fatty liver from regular sugar?
Well, you don't develop fatty liver from regular sugar. You develop fatty liver from eating a high-fat American diet. So the answer is all these kinds of sugars are simple sugars. They're all similar. Take whichever you prefer, whether it be maple syrup or brown sugar or white sugar or molasses or whatever, agave. They're all simple sugars, and whichever you prefer in terms of taste. But we use a little bit of sugar. We use it on the surface of the food. Why? Because it makes the food taste better, and the goal is to get you to eat the food. I've told you many times about the Mary Poppins movie, how they say a little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. Well, if I've got to give you a little bit of sugar on the oatmeal to get you to eat the oatmeal, I'm going to do it. You made some good things this week. Mary made just this wonderful dinner last night, and actually she made it 2 nights ago, and I had it for 2 nights in a row, and I would have it again today.
What is it, Mary?
Well, we had this leftover tofu in the refrigerator, and John said, we better eat this before it expires. And so I made 2 different concoctions of tofu mixture. One was a Asian tofu sauce, and one was another tofu sauce. And the recipes are both in the diet for Healthy Planet.
Yeah.
Diet for a Healthy Planet. And so I made the tofu, one in one pan and one in the oven. And then I made our favorite fried rice dish with already cooked rice in packages, because I'm simple,
No oil. She says fried. She just means looks like fried.
And mixed up with frozen vegetables and put it all together, and then divided it in half and added half of the one kind of tofu into one of them, and half of the other kind of tofu into the other. And They didn't taste that much
Well,
different.
the extra firm had more of a meaty taste. Bring me back to my
Yeah.
old days. But
Okay.
the soft tofu was really good. So I don't know which one I prefer, Mary.
I don't know if I would. I don't know if I would.
But I can tell you what I'm going to have for lunch today. Still some left over.
That's fantastic. There's a question from a live viewer named Phil asking, after starting the starch solution, how long until the type 2 diabetic begins to see improvement?
Immediately, they start to see improvement. First of all, when they stop their medications, they may see the blood sugar go up because the medications are suppressing the blood sugar. But over a short period of time, a matter of hours to days, what happens is the blood sugar starts to go down. Now, it may take a long time for the blood sugars to become normal, particularly since the elevated blood sugar is related to being overweight, having too much fat in your system. It may require you to lose all that excess weight to become a trim body weight. And I use Walter Kempner's measurements on trim body weight, which I believe are in my November 2016 newsletter. Kempner recommendations about what really trim weight is. And if you get to that point and you still have an elevated blood sugar, you're going to feel better. Lots of the parts are going to start working again. The bowels are going to be great. But say your blood sugar is still elevated once you hit trim body weight, then I have to assume that you have partial pancreatic insufficiency, which is also known as type 1.5 diabetes. In other words, you're not making enough insulin. The insulin is not working at the cellular level. You have insulin insensitivity. And if that's the case, if you have type 1.5 diabetes and you have insulin insufficiency, partial pancreatic insufficiency, then I know how to treat that. If you develop side effects like too much weight loss, I know, never lose too much weight, but you could. You could. And if you develop excessive thirst and urination, or if people around you are worried about it, I'll prescribe insulin for you. And I do it commonly. I will prescribe insulin, and I'll prescribe a long-acting insulin like Lantus. And it works out well. It works out really well. The type 1.5 diabetics, so what they have to do is they have to take one shot, 10, 20 units of Lantus before they go to bed in the evening. That's it. Boom. The rest of their day is free to enjoy the kids, to work at your occupation, your fun and games, your friends and family, not being tied to being a diabetic. It's just, being sick and focusing your whole life on your sickness and your treatments is not how you want to be. You want to be well. You don't want to spend your time figuring out which pills you're going to take today. You don't want to have your calendar littered with doctor's appointments and an occasional hospitalization. That's not living. Sick people take drugs. Sick people have checkerboard abdomens secondary to their surgeries. Healthy people don't do that. You want to enter a category of healthy so your life can get back to your own, to enjoying yourselves, not being a sick person. And even if you can't accomplish 100%, doing the right thing will alleviate so much of the burden of your illness and your treatments. It's all so simple.
Lauren wants to know, is it ever safe for a diabetic to drink moderately, meaning alcohol?
That gets into a whole nother subject. Let's see. Alcohol, we talked about alcohol. Alcohol does not turn into fat. It's just too metabolically expensive for it to do that. What alcohol does is that with moderate drinkers, it causes a lack of inhibition. What happens is instead of one potato chip, it becomes 2 bags of potato chips. You're no longer inhibiting your behavior because you've had a couple of drinks. That's where alcohol really causes the problem. Plus, the body would rather burn alcohol than it would fat. So it leaves fat in the fat cells. So in that way, you're going to not lose as much weight consuming alcohol. But ladies and gentlemen, if you stop and think about it, drunks, serious alcoholics, are always stealth thin. Moderate drinkers, not so.
Yep. I heard of a new study out of the UK that's showing that even what they're saying is moderate drinking, like 1 drink a day, leads to cognitive decline. This is a new study that I just saw. Very interesting.
Well, that'll probably ruin a lot of people's days because we love to hear good news about our bad habits.
Yep, so true. So true. There's a question from Jeff. Any concerns with stevia?
Will you address that, Mary?
Well, stevia is a leaf that is ground up, and it's a very sweet leaf, and so it's used as a sugar substitute. But we used it at the program for a long time to stay away from sugar. But we found out that too many people were having bowel problems or intestinal problems or a lot of gas and bloating. And we narrowed it down to the stevia. And so we stopped using it. And we don't use it anymore, just for that reason.
Great. Thank you. Janice says, did he say pasta is healthy food? It's processed.
Well, it is, but remember, Walter Kempner's diet was made of white rice. I think you need to fight your battles where it's most important. Whole grain pasta is going to be healthier than a highly refined pasta, and there are a lot of whole grain pastas out there, and there are a lot of non-wheat pastas. And
rice pasta, brown rice pasta is great.
And then when as opposed to bread, which is dry, when you cook pasta, you cook it with water and it absorbs a lot of the water and therefore decreases the calorie density. But, you're right. It's healthier to eat the wheat berry than to eat the pasta or the bread, but it's not all that bad. I mean, you're still going to get well. You're still going to lose the excess weight if you include breads and bagels. Well, I don't know about the bagels, but certainly breads and pastas. They somehow engineer those bagels.
Well, they're so dense.
Yeah.
They're so much denser than a loaf of bread. I mean, they don't get soft at all. So, I don't know. They just seem more dense.
In an ideal world, you'll eat no refined food. Okay. I mean, I'm not saying that casually. And some of you, it'll be required that for you to get well, to eat no refined food, to lose the extra weight, no refined food. So what you brought up is an important principle. But, in a world where I just want you to get well, I just want you to succeed, I just want you to get your life back, I'm willing to make some compromises in a sense. Not that would compromise your health, but maybe your idealistic attitude about different subjects related to food. We're willing to put a little salt and sugar on the surface of your food because it tastes better. I mean, if you're not enjoying the diet that we recommend, put some salt on the surface of the food. It'd be great. That'll solve the problem. Same thing with spices. I mean, there's some negative things about spices, but they may make the food more familiar to you and put it on the surface of their food. Refined products. Well, it's better to eat a whole grain pasta than a whole grain bread. I'm not kidding. White pasta and white bread, not so good. Not so good. But, as I've talked to you about, is feeding white bread to moderately overweight college students for 2 months. They had to eat 12 slices of bread a day. The average weight loss on white bread was 14 pounds. The average weight loss on brown bread, which I assume is more whole grain bread, was 19 pounds. Just adding the 12 slices of bread a day to their regular regime. They weren't told to eat less pizza or less fried pork chops, fewer fried pork chops. They weren't told to do that. They were just told to eat the bread. You got to eat the bread. Anyway, you're right. Refined products are not the best for you, and you ought to certainly keep that in mind. But in the real practical world, if you include a reasonable amount, what's a reasonable amount of these refined products, you do pretty good. Remember Walter Kempner, white rice, fruit juice, and simple sugar. The best results of anybody I have ever seen practicing any kind of medicine have been those that have been accomplished by Walter Kempner's rice diet. And he's discussed in my, I told you, my December 2013 newsletter. Another one of my mentors, Dennis Burkett, is in my January 2013 newsletter, and Nathan Pritikin's in my February 2013 newsletter, and Roy Swank, who was the head of neurology at Oregon Health and Science University for 23 years. He's discussed all over my website. Just put his name in the search engine and you will find my 4 mentors.
I don't think it's the bread that's the problem. I think it's the peanut butter that people put on the bread.
And the thing is that when you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you've compounded the problems. You've added the sugar with the jelly, which raises the insulin levels. Sugar does that. And you provided the fat in the form of peanut butter. So you've got the insulin around to drive the fat into fat cells. So there's an argument that making the combination is a double whammy when you eat things that are high fat, high sugar, which is pretty much everything out there that's made in terms of desserts. High fat, high sugar.
You're not kidding. There's a question from Graham. Oh my God, it just went away because my chat goes so fast. It was basically for a type 2 diabetic. Do you recommend any supplements or anything else in addition to the diet?
No, I don't recommend supplements. Supplements in terms of vitamins and minerals are dangerous. They increase your risk of dying, heart disease, cancer. Don't take these vitamin and mineral supplements. And that includes vitamin D, which increases your risk of falls and fractures. You should not be taking these. Now, if you mean supplements in terms of natural medicines like saw palmetto and St. John's wort, that's different. These are natural medicines. They're not what I would call supplements. They don't supplement anything. They're used to treat. They're natural drugs to treat. But people often get those confused. When they say supplements, they say, well, are you talking about some kind of herbal preparation that I buy in the supermarket or health food store? No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about supplements in terms of supplementing your body with vitamins and minerals, because somehow or another you don't have enough in them. You should consume these vitamins and minerals in their natural packages, purchase fruits and vegetables.
But you do recommend B12 though, right, Dr. McDougall, if somebody's vegan?
I do. But, just like with any medication that I recommend, I reserve the right to change my opinion. And I've written 2 articles that are on my website on vitamin B12 and wrote one quite recently. And you'll see in there that I still recommend B12. B12 is the only vitamin supplement that I recommend. And B12 was the last vitamin discovered. And B12 is made by bacteria. So we used to consume a lot more bacteria than we used to, in the form of bacteria on the roots of plants and bacteria on the kitchen table left by the chickens. So we used to get a lot more bacteria than we did before. And maybe that's why there have been fewer than 10 cases of.
Remember all the guinea pigs that used to run around the kitchen in the huts in Peru?
There's a big B12 source, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I do recommend vitamin B12, but I reserve the right to change my opinion about it. There was just an article. Well, let's not get into that. Just take your B12. You don't have to take it very often, and the dose is extremely small, smaller than you're ever going to be able to find in the store. You'll be able to find 500 or 5,000 microgram pills. You need 0.05.
So you don't have to take it every day.
No, you can take it once a week, once a month. Now, when was the last time we remembered to take it? I think a couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago, you
Yeah.
remembered.
What I do is, as I'm rummaging through the cabinet looking for my razor or something, I find the B12 and I lay it out there for Mary to take it. And so whenever that happens, then we take our B12. I recommend that you take it daily, and probably weekly would be okay. And I make that as a serious recommendation, because I don't want to be the doctor who causes B12 deficiency in somebody. If I did, I've had trouble getting noticed over the last 50 years. But I'll tell you, I create one case of B12 deficiency, say easily reversible anemia or tingling of somebody's toes and fingers. And I'd hit front page headlines. Vegan diet or McDougall diet causes B12 deficiency. Front page headlines. Why? Because people like to hear good news about their bad habits. Aha, I know I don't have to eat all these plants. I need to get my B12. Well, your risk of B12 deficiency is less, as a disease, is less than 1 in a million. Your risk of a heart attack is 1 in 2. Breast cancer, 1 in 7. Prostate cancer, 1 in 6. Type 2 diabetes, probably 1 in 8. Pre-diabetes, 1 in 2. Obesity, I don't know. I have to calculate the percentage there. I mean, it looks like 80% of the people out there walking the streets are overweight or obese. Certainly 40% are obese. It just doesn't it just blow your mind, particularly if you're a trim, healthy person, to go into a public place and to look around you and everybody in a shopping center, everybody is overweight. And many people are, it's obese. It's abnormal to be trim these days.
Yep. Faith says if you've been diagnosed with low vitamin D, then what about supplementing with D?
No, you should not supplement with D. What you should do is you should, remember, this is the sunshine vitamin. You should get more sunshine. That would help. The other thing you do is you have to fix your chronic diseases like obesity and diabetes and so on, because people who suffer from these chronic dietarily caused illnesses, it results in inflammation. The foods injure the tissues, and as a result, you get inflammation. And one of the byproducts of inflammation is a substance that lowers your vitamin D levels in your bloodstream. So artificially, your vitamin D levels are low, caused by not lack of sunshine, not lack of supplements, but being chronically ill. You can fix it. Do what people have been doing for 1 million years. Walk around the sun, take your clothes off.
Okay. Sherry asks, can you reverse the damage of the pancreas due to high glucose?
I think what she's asking is, can you reverse type 1 diabetes? The answer is no. Once the cells are gone, they're dead. However, you do have a honeymoon period where the person initially appears to be diabetic, and then they seem to get well. Well, that's a healing process that goes on in the progression to total destruction of the beta cells. You get this honeymoon period. I hope that if you were to catch the problem before all the cells were lost during this honeymoon period, and you remedied the situation, in other words, you stopped the dairy products, you ate a healthy diet like I recommend, that you'd end up with some pancreatic function being left. But how many people do that? And how many people are told by their doctor that type 1 diabetes is caused by molecular mimicry between 17 amino acids that are shared by your beta cells of your pancreas and cow's milk? Really, folks? Published in 1992, and no response. The problem is that there's no reason to respond, in the sense there's no reason for somebody to make money by telling you the truth. That's the problem.
Yep. So there was a question, or there is a question from, where did my screen go? Sorry. It was, can you please explain what metabolic syndrome is?
Well, metabolic syndrome is from poisoning from the foods on the American diet. And classically, you're overweight, you have pre-diabetes, you have high triglycerides. It's a combination of things that happen as a result of eating unhealthy food. And they've listed this combination of symptoms all together, and they've called it metabolic syndrome. It's food poisoning. That's what it is. It's, because when you correct the food poisoning by eating the diet that we recommend, your metabolic syndrome goes away. You lose the weight, your triglycerides come down, your blood sugar improves, et cetera. It's just a made up name to identify a common group of signs and symptoms. And it's called metabolic syndrome. Nothing special. It's food poisoning.
Great. Thank you. Wow. So you're sold out for January. The next chance people have would be your February program.
That's what they tell me. We're sold out. Yeah, there's a reason for that, AJ. That is that we run a really, really good program. And people are telling their friends and neighbors, family about the program, how much they benefited. We have a lot of people who have been through the residential program, and which we've run residential programs for 34 years. And we've had people who've come through the St. Helena Hospital program and the resort-based program we ran in Santa Rosa, California, and then they attend the internet program, the telemedicine, telehealth program. And I can't think of a single person who's weighed on the side of the residential program. They've all said this is far better. And our results show it. We get better weight losses, we get better compliance. So it is just an easy way to do it. And the reason is because people are left in their home environment to do this. It's not like you fly off to a resort, spend $10,000 doing it. And then you go home to your own kitchen and you all of a sudden got to do it. You do it right there, alive, with us, with our support, making suggestions for you, telling you where to find things and helping you through the medical issues like, how much insulin should I take today? Or can I stop my blood pressure pills today? We've got a doctor there working all the time on helping you manage your medical issues. And, sometimes I get referred for difficult patients. Not really.
You do.
Yeah, once in a while I get to see a patient. I really miss seeing patients. I used to see 60 patients a program. And I loved seeing every one of them. And I don't get to see as many people as I used to. And I guess that's okay because I'm busy doing a lot of other things like preparing these lectures. But sometimes when there's a difficult issue that comes on, they call in the old guy. The old timer, what does he know that might be able to help? And, it really works out well for me and for everybody. It is the 12-day internet-based telemedicine. In other words, there's a doctor there to care for you. Telehealth, in other words, all the education support you need. Program that we run every month. Take advantage of it. It's about 1/3 of the cost it would cost you to go to the residential program that we ran for so many years.
Great. A lot of people are saying they live in places where the sun doesn't shine.
Well, if that's the case, then you get a light box. You get what do they call them, tanning booths or
I think they call them light boxes actually now, not tanning. They don't call them for they're kind of shaped like they're
they kind of go over you. You lay down and
they're sort of
whatever you call them these days, folks. Tanning salons, whatever you call them.
I think they're called light
But
boxes.
you can when you say light box, I think about the box that you use to treat depression.
Oh.
Whereas,
Okay.
you kind of sit there in front of your desk and you got this light coming in that simulates the visual spectrum that relieves depression.
All right. Okay.
Whereas this other one, this tanning booth, this is the artificial sunshine. You can buy them and plug it into the wall and you get sunshine. You could do that. You could also take a vacation. Your vitamin D levels all year long are reflected by how you spent your summer vacation. So a couple of weeks of sunshine will last you all year long. You could do that, or you could start taking some time off of your busy schedule. You could get out in the sun. How much do you need? Well, a white person like myself needs 5 minutes of sunshine exposure on my face and the back of my hands at noon at the latitude of Boston 3 times a week in the spring, summer, and fall. That's all. You don't need much. Now, darker people, like, for example, Asians, and I know I'm generalizing here, 3 times as much sunshine. A black person, 10 times as much sunshine. It depends on the variation of intensity of the pigment in your skin. The pigment is there to protect you from sunshine. That's why you are more pigmented if your family came from a place near the equator. And if your family has its roots in places that are of high latitude, say Upper Canada or Southern Australia, then what happens is you are white, you've lost the pigments so that the sun can get into your skin and cause the production of vitamin D. It's also natural. It's also simple. Don't take pills. Don't take pills. Don't take vitamin D shots. They're dangerous. Every study I'm aware of that where you take 2,000 international units or more show that you have an increased risk in falls and fractures. And there's lots of research that says even taking smaller doses gets you in the same kind of trouble. Why? Because these supplemental vitamin D sources cause imbalances at the cellular level of your nerves and your muscles. So you fall, fracture. Don't do it. Get some sunshine.
Well, people in these cold climates without sun are asking if the light box still helps you make the vitamin D through the skin.
Well, no, a light box wouldn't do it. See, when I say light box, I think about something you use for seasonal affective disorder. It may all be terminology. I think of a tanning booth as something that provides the spectrum of sunshine that causes you to sunburn, causes production of vitamin D. So they're in my mind, they're two different types of setups.
You can buy them on Amazon and they just describe exactly what they're for.
Yeah.
And so then, they'll tell you this is for sunshine. And the other one is for
Seasonal affective
SAD,
disorder. SAD. Anyway, I don't, you certainly can get burnt by these tanning beds. So be careful.
Kathy says, aren't you concerned about the arsenic in rice?
No, I'm not concerned about arsenic in rice. Do I need to go through that story again? Okay, I will. It was a consumer's report that came out. By the way, this is discussed on my website. You just put in arsenic and the article I wrote will come up. Consumer report, they identified as a high arsenic food, rice. And the previous year, they've published a review of fruit juices, which showed more arsenic in fruit juices, but that didn't have national headlines like the rice scandal did. And yes, rice accumulates arsenic. Where's the arsenic come from? It comes from previous farming. It comes from Louisiana, where they used to grow cotton. And the cotton was infested with boll weevils. To kill the boll weevils, what you used was arsenic, which got into the soil. And now you come by and instead of cotton, you plant rice. Well, what do you think's going to happen? So what I would search out producers that claim that their rice has been tested and it's lower in arsenic. And you know some places where.
Well, we fairly much trust Lundberg. It's over on the East Coast where they didn't plant as much cotton, whereas on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And so we protect.
We think they're pretty good Lundberg
We
farms.
think they're Lundberg. They make all different kinds.
And rice produced in other countries.
I
I've heard.
going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love rice and I'm not even afraid. A lot of people are afraid to eat white rice, but I'm not.
AJ, I've never seen a case of arsenic poisoning, but I've seen a lot of cases of meat and dairy poisoning and oil poisoning. So, and rice cures the meat and the dairy poisoning, the oil poisoning. Anyway, I think it's something you should be aware of and take some steps towards. It's not a good idea to consume arsenic. I want to tell you, if you're worried about toxic heavy metals, like thallium and cesium, things that are known as killers, and you want to stay away from cruciferous vegetables. Your cabbage and your broccoli, and you want to, because they're hyperaccumulators of these toxic metals. They really suck up the poisons. And by the way, you can find that article by going to the website and putting in hyperaccumulators, probably, or cruciferous vegetables, or maybe both. But they'll pop up for you, the article I wrote on that particular topic.
Great. Shar says, how do you feel about time restricted feeding?
I assume that's like eating for 15 minutes as opposed to an hour. Is that right?
Well, I think it's like when like they call it intermittent fasting, where like you're narrowing the feeding window and maybe to like eating only 8 hours a day instead of 12 or longer.
Sounds painful. Sounds like something I wouldn't want to waste my time even putting it on my daily planner. I don't know. I don't think it matters what time of the day you eat. It doesn't matter a lot how many times a day you eat, but people who are grazers, nibblers, they do better than people who are gorgers. I don't think it matters what time of the day you eat. I think what's important is what you eat. And I say this realizing that a lot of people are shift workers. In other words, they work all night long. And their free time is well, they spend their time sleeping during the day, and their meals are at night. I don't think you should be focusing on these kind of peripheral recommendations. The problem is the food. It's the kind of food you eat. You need to switch to a starch-based diet. I hope AJ and I have worked hard enough, and Mary putting her comments about tasty foods so that you've done it. You've realized that this is the truth. It works. I don't have any concern about you coming back to me and saying what you recommended for me to do didn't work. I'm not worried about that a bit. And I also am accepting the fact that you're going to come back to me and say, what you recommended was difficult and I just couldn't do it this time. My response will be, well, let's keep trying. You're learning something new about yourself and about the food every time you quote fail. Let's just keep working at it. Eventually you're going to get it. Just like for me, it took me 12 different experiences to finally quit smoking cigarettes. I had to learn different things. I had to learn that you don't date women who smoke cigarettes. I think I was off cigarettes for several months before I met this lady. Anyway, it took me a while to learn that once you quit smoking cigarettes, you can't start again. I would often fool myself by saying, well, it's been 11 days since I haven't smoked, suffered every one of those days. I just had one, just one. What's the big deal? Just one. I'll tell you, every alcoholic, every heroin user, every tobacco user, and most of you who are food habituated, you just can't have one piece of chocolate cake. It just doesn't ever stops. So once you realize that that's normal behavior and you can guard against it, then you do it 100%.
Well said. Thank you so much. I don't see any more questions. So we know you're coming back in 2 weeks. You're going to be talking about heart disease and hypertension.
Is that what I have scheduled?
That's what you have scheduled. So it's going to be in 2 weeks from today, which is the 17th of January. I think that's Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday celebrated. And hopefully we'll have another surprise guest for you that's going to give a testimonial, because there's certainly so many out there.
I can tell you, AJ, I'm just looking at it now. In 2 weeks, I'm probably going to spend every day for the next 2 weeks getting this lecture ready. I hope it showed how much effort I put into it.
I felt like I was at a conference. I'm like, this is so good. I mean, we're so blessed, because it's the kind of caliber that you get, like if you're going to get a CEUs at a conference.
Oh, good. I'm glad you see it that way. I hope I made some very difficult subjects understandable. And you have the video there, so you can go back and rewatch it. And you can look at the slides. There's a lot of extra information on the slides. You can look at the references, and you can look up the scientific studies, see whether or not I exaggerated, whether it's really true what I told you. And you can always challenge your healthcare providers, nurses and doctors and other people involved in your healthcare. You challenge with what I said. Hey, watch the lecture Dr. McDougall gave on diabetes. See if that's true. Or, hey, Dr. McDougall gave a really good lecture on breast cancer, which is completely contradictory to what you're recommending for me. Tell me why he's wrong. Really, folks, I don't mind being challenged. I hate being ignored.
Yeah, you've said that. I'd rather be hated than ignored.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, no one could ignore you. Thank you so much, Dr.
Oh, thanks,
McDougall.
AJ.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much, Larry and Ann Weed. I know they're still watching. It was such a pleasure catching up with you. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time when my guest is Dr. Paul Giles. Take care, everyone. Bye.